I'm Meredith Elbaum. I am the Executive Director here at Built Environment Plus. We're excited to have you here for this event. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this event. You should have heard a little announcement. If you don't want to be recorded, just don't say anything. If you have any questions, Ethan, raise your hand, is running the show behind the scenes. And so you can private message him if you have any questions. Built Environment Plus, we're a little bit of a different community. This is very much going to be a participating event. You can see my dog behind the window. She has, Ethan can attest, she's been sitting down all day and she decided to tell you guys that there's someone outside the window. She'll lay back down. There she goes. We're a little bit of different community. This is going to be there's going to be plenty of time to participate. We encourage people to keep your mics off unless you're talking and muted. But then if you can, to keep your cameras on. It's nice to see all your faces and be part of the community. We will be going out into breakout rooms, and so be prepared to turn on your cameras then. If you can't or don't want to for some reason, that is completely fine. We have AIA and LFA credits for this event today. The AIA credits, there will be a survey at the end. It's actually on the Miro board if you want to do that earlier. But then the LFA credits you will self-report, as is typical with LFA credits. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to share my screen. If I didn't just click off, and I am going to share my Miro board. You guys are over there. Ethan, give me a thumbs up if you're seeing my Miro board. There you go. Well, here we go. So Miro is here, and I want to give you, it is, and this is our board for today. I'm pinching my trackpad to come in and out. Up here in this upper right-hand corner are some things that you should look at. One is this little settings box. And if you're having some problems navigating, check out this navigation mode. Choose to make sure that you have mouse or trackpad accurately applied, and check out these little directions for how to scroll depending on if you're on a mouse or trackpad, but make sure you have that set properly, otherwise it's kind of a nightmare in Miro. Another thing is that you have this option right up here. You can turn on your collaborators' cursors. So there you are, Casey and Lisa and others. You can also turn them off. So sometimes I like to see where all of you guys are and what you're looking at, which is kind of fun, but I'm going to turn them off for now. Another thing that's just kind of fun is if you hold this down, it switches between panning versus selecting something. So I can go in here and move Hannah's tab. If you want to add a sticky note, go over here, click on it, and just put it in here and say hello. There you go. So that's Miro for you. The majority of the board is locked, so you don't have to worry about that. We're going to be using the Miro board for taking notes today. So what is our objective for today in the dangers of PFAS chemicals in built environment? Lisa Carey Moore wrote this, which is to raise awareness in our community and the AEC and building product manufacturing community about the prevalence of PFAS in the built environment, and to provide participants, that's all of you, with concrete actions they can take to begin tackling the issue in their work. So we're hoping that's the goal of this session, is to come away with concrete actions that you all can take and we can all take together. In the agenda, you're hearing my little welcome right now. Next up, we're going to have Laura Spark with Clean Water Action. We have Charlie Stevenson coming on after that from Integrated Eco Strategy, and then Hannah Ray with the Green Science Policy Institute. And then we have a couple breakout sessions for all of us to talk together, which will be fun coming up. So BE Plus, we are a member-driven nonprofit who drives sustainable and regenerative design, construction, and operations of the built environment. We do a whole lot of education, community building, which this is partly, advocacy, which this is partly, and also research and tools. We couldn't do this without the support of our sponsors, including our platinum level sponsors, Boston Property, and our silver level sponsors, Daikin, National Grid, The Green Engineer, and Turner. As well, we wanted to give a special shout out to Charlie and his team at Integrated Eco Strategy for sponsoring today's event. Thank you, Charlie. So B+, as part of building community and education and advocacy and research and tools, we run a whole bunch of roundtables. A couple of those roundtables are the health and wellness roundtable. That roundtable did put together this event and is actively working on advocacy work. We partner a lot with Laura and the Clean Water Action on our advocacy initiatives. One of that was helping pass some flame retardant legislation last year, and we're working with Laura currently. As well, we are the home for the Living Future Collaborative of New England, and that group is partnering on this as well, of course, with chemicals of concern being a major part of ILFI and living buildings. And so with that, as I said, we partner with with Laura Spark. It's always Lisa Carey Moore and Lisa Goodwin Robbins, and we have a lot of Lisas in our community, but today we have another L, we have Laura Spark, and we're happy to have her joining us as one of our partners in this initiative. So I'm going to stop my share and hand it over to Laura.
Hi, everybody. As Meredith said, I am Laura Spark, and I, most of what we're going to be talking about today is your actual projects and how to identify PFAS in your projects. But as Meredith said, we've been working fairly closely with Built Environment on advocacy steps. I'm going to share my screen for a quick second. Let's see. Okay, so states, because of the federal process on chemical reform is a bit stuck. For the last number of years, the states has really been where action is on chemical related issues. Actually, today there is a federal PFAS Action Act being filed, but even so, states are really where there's been progress on chemicals, on toxic chemicals, and particularly on PFAS. So this session, multiple bills have been filed to turn off the tap and stop using PFAS, with the idea that we can't stop PFAS contamination if we don't stop making and using products that contain PFAS. The bills that have been filed this session are, there are a number of them, there are 5 that we are focusing on, some of which involve architects and some of which do not. There is a bill to ban PFAS in food packaging. There's another bill to ban PFAS in a range of consumer products, carpets, rugs, furniture, textiles, aftermarket sprays applied to carpets, rugs, and textiles, car seats, personal care products, which includes things like cosmetics, dental floss, menstrual underwear, and cookware, pots and pans. There is another bill to ban pesticides used in the state mosquito control program from containing PFAS, a bill to ban PFAS from being added to firefighters' personal protective equipment, and then a final one to require PFAS to be removed from children's products. So one question might be, why all of these bills going in different directions? There had initially been an effort to try to develop a more comprehensive bill. But at the same time that individual legislators were looking at different ways that there could be inroads on different aspects of PFAS, a bill passed last session to create a PFAS task force. And in part, just because of the politics of the State House, the PFAS task force wanted to be the place where most issues related to water were taken on. So PFAS and firefighting foam, cleaning up contaminated communities, all of that sits in the PFAS task force. When we began the session, it did not, we began to talk about what the European Union was doing. In 2019, the European Union decided to ban all PFAS uses except those that are considered essential because they have some relationship to maintaining health and safety or critical function of society. We brought up the European legislation early in the session, and earlier on, it did not look like a broad ban like what was happening in Europe could get passed in the United States. Well, as it turns out, as many of you know, Maine did in fact look at the European model, and they passed a very similar piece of legislation to what the EU is doing. So Maine is banning all PFAS uses except those that are currently unavoidable because they are related to health, safety, or critical functions of society. Given what Maine has done, what the advocacy community is doing, and we hope that that includes all of you, is we are going to be continuing to try to pass the bills that have been introduced that go after specific PFAS uses in food packaging, carpets and rugs, again, personal care products, because we think of all of those uses as low-hanging fruit. Those are all uses in which PFAS is not, with the exception of firefighters' personal protective equipment, those are all uses in which PFAS is not needed. There's lots of food packaging made without PFAS, same thing with carpets and rugs. So we consider that low-hanging fruit. But we are going to be trying to work with the Interagency PFAS Task Force to push for a more comprehensive approach. So as I said a minute ago, the task force is addressing water contamination and more. The co-chairs are Representative Kate Hogan and Senator Julian Sear. Senator Sear represents the Cape, Representative Hogan represents the Stowe and Maynard area. Both of them represent communities that have had significant water contamination. And their goal, as they've talked about it with advocates, is really to come up with comprehensive PFAS legislation by early next year and to position Massachusetts as a leader. They'll be issuing a report by the end of December 2021 and recommendations and legislation in early 22. And some of the individual bills that were introduced earlier may be rolled into the PFAS task force legislation. So where we think there is a role for all of us is to really push for this kind of comprehensive legislation, banning PFAS and firefighting foam, banning most uses of PFAS, taking a cue from the EU and now Maine, providing for water treatment and alternative water sources for impacted communities, looking at health and medical monitoring for people who may already have elevated levels of PFAS in their bodies and want to get an understanding of how that impacts them. Another issue, and this may go a little bit beyond architecture, but not necessarily, is taking additional steps to prevent contamination from releases, land application of contaminated compost and biosolids, and improper disposal of PFAS. Right now, there's a lot of research into how to sort of break up PFAS so that there can be a proper way of disposing of it, but there isn't really any good way that's brought to scale to get rid of it. So that's another thing that we're looking at. And finally, requiring PFAS manufacturers to pay for the damages and cost of cleanup. So those are the things that we're looking at. If you are interested or anybody's interested in getting involved, we're going to be coming back to built environment at different points over the course of the session. On the bills, we have an action alert. You could just click on it and express support for the bills. For the task force, writing a letter to the members of the task force, the chairs, is a way to express your concerns. Again, if built environment isn't quite ready to do that, we're going to be identifying points over the course of the session where letters might be useful. And I think one of the really important places for architects to be involved is really on that definition of essential uses. There are definitely important uses of PFAS in the built environment. It may be difficult to get some of those uses phased out, but going through sort of a careful process of identifying where you believe PFAS can be quickly replaced by other chemicals or other approaches, and places where a shift will be more complex, is the kind of thing that that architects can do to help inform the debate and the way that PFAS is used in building products.
Great, thanks, Laura. Charlie is now going to put take what Laura said and bring into context, Charlie from Integrated Eco Strategy, pull into the building industry context. I think not just architects as well as manufacturers and builders and everyone who's working on building our buildings. So Charlie, I turn it over to you.
Perfect, thank you. We really begin with the idea of regulatory challenges and failures that we all look forward to a day when there has been a widespread ban on the use of PFAS and other chemicals of concern. We're not there yet. So I'm really here to talk about how we get from where we are today to where we want to be. So, we're familiar with LEED certification, and LEED really begins with the idea of benefiting the building occupant. We want to shift that conversation and broaden that conversation so that we're, instead of just thinking about interior occupant health, we're thinking about installers, factory workers, fence line communities, and ultimately using our building projects to reduce and eliminate, where possible, the production of toxins. So, we see historically an increase in production of toxins, but we think that as specifiers and consumers, we have power here. If we can lower our demand, we can elicit a response by manufacturers and reduce or eliminate the production of toxins over time. Interestingly and importantly, this effort is getting significantly easier. My colleagues and I have been working on this process for over a decade, and we know that the cost and the effort drops both as the market matures for preferable products, and also as procedures improve within the design and construction community. We have paths to follow, and therefore we can do this more cost effectively. When we sort of looked at the CSI divisions years ago, they all seemed really intractable, that we didn't have enough information to make good decisions. So everything was hard, and therefore it was hard to get started. What we've found through repeated work in collaboation with many of you here on the call is that many of these divisions, and in particular product types within particular divisions, have good solutions today. And that gives us the opportunity to advance to the state of the market instantaneously, and then focus our work on those places where we hope for more improvement. And ultimately, this is where we sit. Each of us here can request, or ideally even require, ingredient disclosure from manufacturers. On the basis of that information, select products that have the best available ingredients, or put differently, the least of the lowest amount of non-desirable ingredients. And then we know there are failures in the market right now, so reluctantly procuring that which is necessary, but using your voice and the power of your project's budgets to advocate for further improvement. This iterative process is precisely what's led to the advances we've seen so far, and we're really eager to help each of you understand the role that you can play at any scale in accelerating this work yet more. With that, I'll turn it over to Hannah.
So Hannah is joining us from the Green Science Policy Institute. And I think and we're glad to have you joining us to share your expertise. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Hannah. I've got a material science background, and before joining the Green Science Policy Institute, I used to work at an electrochromic window company owned by Saint-Gobain. And today, I'll be giving an overview of the problem of PFAS in building materials, about which we wrote a very long report, and it was published this spring. So here's the agenda. Introduce GSP, let you know what PFAS are. I'll go quickly through the PFAS regulation since Laura did a great job of summarizing that already. We'll talk about the report's findings, and then end with hopefully some action and some questions for this expert community. So at the Green Science Policy Institute, we do scientific research and build partnerships among business, government, academia, and nonprofits to find innovative solutions, policy and purchasing changes that can reduce the use of toxic chemicals. Please visit greensciencepolicy.org, sixclasses.org, and pfascentral.org for more information about what we do. And if you want to know more about PFAS and haven't already watched it, I highly recommend listening to the great presentation that Rob Bolott did for our webinar back in May. He's the lawyer who battled DuPont for 22 years. You can read his book Exposure or watch the movie Dark Waters for a much more comprehensive history of the study of PFAS. Okay, so PFAS are per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They are man-made, highly fluorinated organic chemicals. They're very useful as oil and water repellent compounds and are widely used in Teflon, aqueous firefighting foam, clothing, fast food packaging, cosmetics, and as we'll discuss here, building materials. The strength of that carbon-fluorine bond leads to their oil and water repellency properties, but the strong bond is also extremely difficult to break, which means that these chemicals don't break down, will persist in our bodies and in the environment. Note that the two compounds here have 8 carbons in their chain. These are the most studied compounds and have been phased out in the US, but have been replaced with shorter chain compounds that are also harmful and persistent. All of us have PFAS in our bodies, including babies, and these chemicals harm health. So health risks include cancer, elevated cholesterol, obesity, immune suppression, and endocrine disruption. There are many ways to be exposed to PFAS, but one key way is through drinking water. And there are pathways for PFAS to get into drinking water throughout their life cycle, from manufacturing to product use to end of life. This slide references my colleague's 2016 paper showing that PFOA and PFOS were detected over the EPA's lifetime health advisory level of 70 nanograms per liter in the drinking water of over 6 million Americans. This is to note that, again, that the life cycle of PFAS have pollution impacts during the chemical manufacturing, product use, and end of life, but especially production of PFAS is a dirty process. And historically, PFAS manufacturing plants have been the biggest sources of PFAS releases to the environment. Factories that buy PFAS and use it to manufacture products have also been sources of contamination, something that I'm somewhat familiar with coming from the parent company, Saint-Gobain. And that this is why it's important to try and reduce all uses of this class of chemicals. This timeline shows that the guidelines for safe limits on the concentration of one of the compounds, PFOA, has decreased over time as we've learned more and more about the chemical. So the safe guideline started out here at 5 parts per billion, and then over time has decreased. This was an internal to DuPont safe guideline. As word came out because of Rob Bolott about the dangers of this chemical, the federal government started setting limits. And most recently, as Laura said, the states have been the most active and the most progressive on trying to limit the use and the levels of these compounds in our water. Remember that these compounds don't break down in our bodies and they're difficult to excrete. So, you know, like as you drink more and more of the water, it will build up in your body. That's why the lower levels are more reasonable. So I'm going to talk a little bit about regulation. So just high level, we're not just looking at PFOA and PFOS. So according to the OECD definition of PFAS, there are 4,730 different compounds in commerce. Only 29 of those compounds are measurable by EPA certified methods, and only 2 of them have federal health advisories. And many more than just those 2 are associated with health and environmental harm. So here's some recent state laws that have been passed. The website saferstates.com does a really great job of tracking all the most recent policies put in place by the states. Yeah, Laura went over the food packaging and the firefighting foam, and as more studies come out about PFAS presence in different products, I believe that we'll see more states trying to put bans on PFAS in those products. Yeah, last week there was the ban in Maine, banning the sales of PFAS treated carpets, rugs, and fabric treatments by 2023, requiring manufacturers to report on PFAS use in products, and then banning all unnecessary PFAS uses by 2030. And again, this was motivated by the discovery that PFAS was contaminating sewage sludge that was being spread on fields, and there's a pathway to people's food from that. And then today, people are debating in the House of Representatives the PFAS Action Act of 2021, which would designate PFAS as hazardous substances under CERCLA. And then there's a lot of supporting actions that would help prevent and clean up this class of compounds, provide funding, prohibit unsafe incineration, and classify it as air pollutants and all of these other things. So it is bipartisan. We'll see whether it goes somewhere in the House and hopefully into the Senate, but at least the US is starting to look at this in this way. And then as Laura mentioned, the EU is pretty far ahead and is also looking at limits on PFAS in drinking water, food, industrial waste, and sewage sludge, and would restrict PFAS for all non-essential uses in the next couple of years. All right, so that was a brief introduction to PFAS, and I hope I've made the point that these chemicals are problematic and difficult to clean up. Prevention is preferable, and they should only be used when necessary. So now we'll go into the report, Building a Better World. You can find that on our website. I want to acknowledge the hard work of the authors, Seth, Carol, and Tom, editors, and then our designer, Allison Appin. It was a lot of work to put all of this information together. This report was compiled using 5 main sources of information. It's all publicly available information. So peer-reviewed studies, government and non-governmental reports, active US patents, company websites, and transparency labels. Note that the report doesn't cover all building products that contain PFAS or every specific function of PFAS. It was what information we could find about PFAS in building materials. And these are some broad categories of places where we found the use of PFAS. So those categories are roofing, coatings, flooring, sealants and adhesives, glass, fabric, wires and cables, tape, wood products, solar panels, seismic dampening, and artificial turf. Note that we saw evidence that PFAS can be contained in these materials, but we don't know how common PFAS is in some of the categories. Like it may be completely prevalent in specific types of tape, PTFE tape, right? But we don't know how common it is in the granules on shingles. And in order to try and learn more about that, we are going to do some testing. And please refer to the report or our videos from our webinar for more details. Here we want to focus on a little bit on why we care that PFAS are in building materials, and it's the potential exposure scenarios. So this one shows PFAS that's contained in a roofing material, leaching out of it and into stormwater and then contaminating the water and the environment. Here's one where there's a worker or a DIYer applying a sealant spray. This is actually a real example. There was a grout sealer that had to be recalled due to respiratory complications, nausea, dizziness, and passing out associated with fluoropolymer exposure. And PFAS that are contained in fabric can migrate out into the dust, and then through hand-to-mouth behavior by small children, pets, and adults can make its way into our bodies. And here I just wanted to highlight again that the main concern is the life cycle impact. As PFAS are manufactured, they do get emitted into the environment, both during chemical manufacture and during product manufacture. And then end of life is also a concern because most building material categories do end up in a landfill. And so waste professionals and the surrounding communities may be exposed to PFAS because of this. One final note about the report is that ingredient disclosure is such a major challenge in this product category, in building material product categories. Transparency labels like HPDs and declare labels were a really rich source of information for us, but not all products have those. Manufacturer affidavits seem to be a tool that large architecture firms and builders use. Here's this list of classes of chemicals. Please tell me that they do not contain, your products do not contain them. That's less useful to the public because it's not citable. But tools that you can use to try and figure out whether different products contain PFAS. If you check out the IL5 red list for this year, it's going to include more PFAS. Of course, another really strong way to ascertain whether PFAS are in the building materials is through third-party certification. It's just really hard to get information about it. And this is why I actually really love Charlie's tool. So moving on to action, this is a big problem, but I think that architects, designers, and builders have a tremendous amount of power to create a healthier built environment. So here's some concrete things you can do. One thing is to learn about harmful chemicals in the products that you use. We've got the 6classes.org website that sort of tries to explain those in a simple way. You can request ingredient disclosure from product manufacturers using standardized tools like HPDs and declare labels. You can identify safer alternatives for PFAS for uses that are necessary and try to innovate design details that eliminate the need for PFAS. So those are just ideas that we thought of, but I'm sure that this community can think of even more ideas to try and create change. And I'll end with a request, which is to help us learn. So if you, in your work, come across ingredient disclosures for products containing PFAS, please share them with us. If you can come up with safer alternatives that you would use instead of a product containing PFAS, please share it with us. If you have great success in your design or your contract language in eliminating PFAS from your building, please share it with us. And then if you're really encountering obstacles or you need specific tools or changes or regulations to be able to do this, we also want to know, because we can try and bring together different stakeholders to try and overcome those challenges. So here's my email address. It's hannah@greensciencepolicy.org. I'm the point person for the PFAS and building materials effort. Please open a dialogue with me. I'm eager to learn from all of you. So please share the report with your networks, and again, email me at this email address. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Hannah. Lots of information in a short period of time. I'm sure that we could probably listen to you as well as Charlie and Laura for a lot longer than the time that we've allotted. I see some questions in the chat right now. If Hannah and Laura and Charlie want to answer some of those in the chat, that would be great. What we're going to do now is go into some breakout rooms, thinking about this community, the primarily Massachusetts, although we have people from other places, building community, and beginning to think about a list of high priority product types that we really want to focus on, and what can we do together. And so we are going to break people out into groups of, I think, 5 or so people. Ethan's got it all set for us. We have some of our facilitators in each of those groups, and we are going to ask for a scribe. We are using that Miro board to take notes so we can all see each other's notes. I have put that link again. I just put that into the chat. And the scribe, if they are willing, is going to be the person who had salad last. And if you had salad at the same time, then it's for the person with the best salad. Now, if someone is not able to be a scribe because of one reason or another, and is not comfortable with that, then we will then you can assign that to someone else in the group. But with that, we have about 10 minutes that we're going to go into these groups to have a discussion on creating a list of high priority product types that we need to address first. Then we're going to come back all together for a group discussion, and then we'll go out into other breakout rooms. So unless there are any questions, we are going to go on to the breakout rooms. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so we have a few minutes right now to have a wrap up or report out from the groups. And so I'm just going to ask for a volunteer from each room to give kind of one thing, and that was a priority that you guys discussed, and then we'll go into something else, and then we'll go on to another room. But if you had your top priority, what would that be? And so room number 1, what was your top priority?
Jonas, you gonna report out for us? I'm sorry, I totally put you on the spot.
Well, we most about Tyvek wrapping, which is that plastic wrapping that goes around houses while they're being constructed or other buildings, and we were uncertain if it does contain PFAS. So we did a quick search, and it seems like when it is coated for water resistance that it does. And so that was our main thing that I guess was unique.
Wow. Room number 2, what was your top?
I'll speak for it. I think someone from the group said carpets, furniture, and stain resistant coatings on cloth because they don't necessarily perform the way as advertised.
And room number 3. I'm going to call on Gary, who I think is muted.
Sorry, I wasn't muted a minute ago. We kind of got off on a tangent, but we were seeing coatings and adhesives as the bigger issue at the moment, and I was thinking, and I think some of us are thinking, that textiles have been improving, so it's sort of a toss-up.
Let's come back to that because it seems like we're kind of all over the place in terms of what the priorities should be, or maybe it's all of them. Room number 4. I feel like I'm in the dating game. Room number 4. Say your bit. Let's see. Mike, you want to tell us about room number 4?
Yeah, I'm glad you called it because I didn't actually know what room I was in. So as far as the number goes, but yeah, so I mean, we kind of had a lot of different things we were talking about. I don't think we talked about what we were supposed to talk about, but what we did acknowledge was that carpets and textiles already have good options. And so we didn't really get to what we're going to talk about next. But so personally, I'll just throw my opinion out there that I feel that coatings and adhesives, like the last person said, would be a really good focus for us because my experience, they're kind of like easy to identify as products in buildings, but and I just kind of feel like a lot of those companies are very kind of sophisticated with their chemicals and hopefully can find better alternatives.
Great. And room number 5. I'm gonna call on Sandy for that one.
All right, Sandy's unmuted. So I'm gonna ask Kathleen to step in if, so we had electricity, water, and alternatives to photovoltaics and how that's kind of coming out. There was talk of CSI Division 7 insulation and PFAS in there with passive house growing. I don't know, I guess pick one. So why don't we stick with the PFAS and insulation?
Okey-doke. So we have a couple more minutes and I'm just gonna open it up. If someone has thoughts on this or how to kind of pulling this all together, how do we make this priority? I've heard a few kind of coatings and adhesives, it seems like is a big thing. Lisa Goodwin Robbins, what do you think?
Thanks, Meredith.
Anytime, Lisa.
The first places to start are the things that have been easiest so far, which would be textiles, fabrics, window shades, carpets. Those manufacturers, there are several manufacturers in each category that are eliminating PFAS and flame retardants and all kinds of other icky things. So I would start there.
I think that's another question though related to all this is like, which one should we be trying to use versus get rid of? And like, it's a priority. So one thing we've been talking about is which one is the worst to try to get rid of. But then the other option is which is the easiest to replace. And that might be the priority, is which is the easiest to replace as opposed to which has the most in it. We didn't really define how we're establishing the priorities like that.
Yeah, and one of the things about the coatings and adhesives is to design smarter so that you don't need so much stuff. Let's try to eliminate the gratuitous use of what Charlie and I affectionately refer to as construction goop. That let's not glue everything to the walls, let's screw it on instead. You can move it in the future and then you don't have this extra layer of goop in your building.
Fasteners coated in PFAS?
Casey, can you say that again?
I agree with Lisa about using fasteners instead of adhesives. So like maybe screws or nails. However, are those now starting to be coated in PFAS? And how would we search for that? Am I looking at an HPD for nails, which I've never tried to look at before?
HPDC is spending a lot of time thinking about fasteners, and I'll defer to my colleague Seth, but we did find evidence of roofing nails coated with PFAS at least. So
why would you coat fasteners with PFAS? What's the advantage?
For the nails, it's supposed to make them penetrate shingles easier, reduce friction.
When that's the part of the thought about artificial turf is that it's not intentionally added, but it's PFAS is coated onto a machine part, and that's how it gets in the turf. I don't know if that's what you found, Tom.
Yeah, that's my understanding of what's going on with turf too.
I have a question about when they're coated. Does that mean that they also more easily come off? When these things are coated, is that more easily that they're gonna, like from these fasteners on the shingles and stuff with those nails, as time happens and rain happens, will that eventually come off into the ground before they end up in the landfill?
It's a good question. And I'd say that it depends on the chemistry of the coating. There are actually a lot of different types of PFAS, and depending on which type of coating is used, they'll be more or less likely to come off. If you think about coatings on textiles, those types of PFAS are more, we have more evidence that they can come off than the polymer type coatings that might be on a nail.
Thank
So kind of within the textiles, and Betsy kind of mentioned this too, supply chain and knowing where your things come from, but with textiles, more and more manufacturers are going to remove that soil and stain protectant and test their fiber for that performance. So, and it's fiber content. If you have 100% polyester, certain fibers, you think nylon ropes, it doesn't need to be treated, but the consumer, the client, the end user of that school or whatever thinks, oh, soil and stain protection, I need that. Well, no. So that's what I think manufacturers just need to really, I don't know how to say it, give up the cozy blanket or the bottle or, you know, something to give up having to use soil and stain protectant to make their fabric more performance, and then just make it performance rather than using that as a, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but does that make sense?
It does. I'd say one of my favorite stories is when Tim Conway of Shaw talks about carpet, and he talks about working with university clients and saying, you know, maybe you just don't want to use white carpet in a college, you know, dining room. Like, and so that, you know, we don't need that, you know, to be able to use different kind of products. And there's, I think that's something, you know, Lisa, you're talking about some of that as well. Okay, we are going to head into our second breakout room. I think as I was jumping around your rooms that some of you were talking about this already. What should we do immediately? Discussing groups and share ideas, you know, and Lisa Carey Moore couldn't join us today, and she was helped us put in a lot of work planning this event today. And so we put some ideas. I know some of you guys are talking about transparency, but what are some of the things that we can do right away that we should do right away as an industry, as a local group? So we're going to go back into those rooms to have about another 10-minute discussion about that. And then we will come back. And I do want to say that, you know, we do have our health and wellness roundtable. And so we will be continuing these conversations and have more room for action as a community with Built Environment Plus and our collaborations with our guests today. So 10 minutes of talking about action. What are some of the things that we should be doing and asking for? People all here. Welcome back, everyone. I loved watching your Miro boards getting filled out, and I'm curious to hear what you have to say. I definitely see some trends across them. So we're gonna shake it up a little bit and go backwards. So room 5, let's hear a little bit about what you guys talked about. Does room 5 not know who was in room 5? That was,
we've
there you
got,
go.
I think we know room 5. I can speak for room 5 unless someone else would like to. Laura or Casey, you want the mic?
I wrote, can you see the things on the, Meredith, can you see on the board?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So chat room 5 action items: educate folks about PFAS contamination, increase awareness, review typical specifications to eliminate PFAS, and remove spec material from libraries at offices. Well, architectural and engineering offices, I think specifically. And then, because I think there was a good point about, you know, and I know when I was in the architectural business, you tend to use similar products all the time because they work. And require companies to disclose PFAS use in products and list it on STS materials. So that's the material safety data sheets, which are accompany every project and specification. And so then push for a ban in food packaging, because point was made that particularly food packaging is something that is direct content, food to mouth to body, right? And then material science research into the next best thing.
Great, thanks, Kathleen. One thing I think about, you know, food packaging, I think is interesting. Ethan and I were talking about, you know, how do we get more people aware of this issue? And I think, you know, I think that 90% of the people out there don't realize that PFAS is in food packaging, and it could be a way to focusing on food packaging brings it to the everyday consumer that this is an issue and why they should care. And then maybe they'll start looking at other things. So anyways, moving on, room 4, something you guys want to add to this conversation?
Hi, it seems like our theme was education, you know, and having an in-house education team too, or being the champion, a material health person to know all this information, and then passing it along to others. And then like watching the 6 chemicals of concern is a great opener to have everyone on your team watch, and then asking manufacturers for alternatives to PFAS and just making cleaner ingredients.
I love that. Can someone drop, I don't know if everyone knows about the videos that you've described. Can someone drop a link to them in the chat for us? Much appreciated. Perfect. Thanks. Room 3.
We talked about a lot of different things. I think awareness is coming up again, understanding what is bad and where it's bad, and how we can use alternatives. So it's understanding, you know, who has the alternatives, and get those into our building projects more frequently. And then there were questions about, you know, who needs to be educated and how to educate as well, and whether it's just industry or the consumers, but it seems to be everybody just needs to get educated in general. If anyone else from the group wants to chime in, feel free.
I'll just say the other thing we talked about were the need for tools to make this easy for architects and specifiers and even engineers to help get them on board. Things like incorporating PFAS into mindful materials came up, incorporating them into HPDs, making it easy for folks because people don't have time.
Yeah, thanks. That's great.
Absolutely. Room 2.
Does someone else from room 2 want to summarize? Hearing none. Okay, so we had folks from, we had educators, we had an NGO person, we had somebody from, we had a lawmaker, we had designers in our room. So we kind of came up with different things that each of those roles could do. So for the NGO, it was continuing to do education and producing good quality research for lawmakers to use. For lawmakers to take the example of Maine and the EU and try to regulate PFAS as a class, and then comparing notes across municipalities, like on the local level, and then on the state level and the federal level, and then across looking at the EU too. So trying to share successes and best practices. For designers and specifiers, specifying PFAS-free in their own projects, getting others within the firms and across firms to do the same thing. If you don't get education in toxics, during your training, to continuing education to learn more. And then we had, I don't know if somebody wants to speak more about saying, like, don't just have the sustainability meeting, but integrate it into the design. That's sort of a longer thing that we were talking about. Then, yeah, educators making toxics more of a priority in the curriculum, including a piece in every course, teaching designers to be advocates, and then talking to friends and family.
Great, thanks, Hannah, for taking the reins. And room 1. I'm gonna call on Lisa again if no one steps up.
Thanks a lot. We talked a lot about education. Everybody's heard of the Green Science, the 6 classes videos, which I think are great tools I gave a couple of examples about things that we've got going on, and we talked about the difficulty of getting this information from suppliers to manufacturers, and then from manufacturers to contractors. I think there may be a need for contractor education here and there. That's about it. Meredith, what's next?
What's next is what's next. Where do we go from here? Now, I'm sure some of you came into this knowing all of this. Some of you came into this learning this for the first time. We've got this great report that the Green Science Policy Institute came out with. Thinking about this community, what do we need to do? What do we need to do next? Thoughts on next steps. I hear a lot about education. The things that we can do. I always talk about, this is not my own phrase. It's one thing that I borrowed from another, but it's the thought of group genius, and that we can all do more together than we can individually. And that, a lot of times we're heads down in our own projects, but how can we work together to do more? Thoughts on that? And I'd say that the things that we come up here with can be continued both with partner organizations and then also in our health and wellness roundtable. Looks like Gary, you're going to chime in.
I was just going to say our office has someone that works directly with mindful materials, and I think advocating through groups like that develop the tools that we use, just us asking them to try to help us understand who has what. And I think the red list expanding to include some of this stuff will help with that as well. So the labeling, the sooner we can label things, the easier it will be for us to start navigating where to go. And I think as soon as more manufacturers are labeling, other manufacturers who compete against them will want to have the same kind of label.
I see that Margie put the mindful materials link in the chat. Thank you for that. Gary, can you just describe mindful materials for those who might not know what it is?
So it's essentially a database of material products. And it's a way to search that database to find products that meet certain environmental parameters. And it's sort of a all in one place. It's attempting to be an all in one place to find what's labeled with what environmental qualification. It's still growing, so it doesn't have everything, but they're working on it.
So one of the things that's great about mindful materials is that everything is live linked through an API, so the database is always up to date, which is really helpful. The downside is there's not a lot of products outside of Division 9.
Yeah, we also use, it's a little different, it's tangential, but it's just another tool. We use Material Bank to get samples in our office as a lower embodied carbon method of getting samples and delivering samples. And Material Bank and Mindful Materials work with each other, so you can kind of link between both databases. So the more these tools that are trying to help us make decisions at whatever level are working with each other, the more we will use those tools and get access to this, kind of cross-pollinate the information.
I would add to that too. You mentioned like getting stuff labeled and tagged and how helpful that is in the building industry, but I also could see how beneficial that is just in basic consumer products. Having labels on things, at one point we talked about the Cal Prop 65 tags on materials or on products at stores. And even, I think a lot of people don't even know what those mean. I have friends that text me asking me what that means, and then I tell them don't buy it. But, having more things like that, that you could flip up a couch cushion and see that there's no fire retardants in it. Something similar for PFAS.
I have a question for Charlie. Are you guys finding any new challenges trying to get PFAS out of your database?
The biggest challenge is knowing what's a PFAS. So we've been doing some work with Green Science Policy Institute. You know, LBC Red List tracks a double-digit number of CAS numbers for PFAS, and Green Science Policy Institute is approaching 5 digits of chemicals of concern. So you know we're 3 orders of magnitude difference, and this is where it gets really tricky because I know from practice that it's hard to track 500 or 1,000 chemicals. So we don't want to overwhelm the system with 9,000 new chemicals because we don't feel like we have the system working well just yet. So I think there's a balancing act here, and it goes back to that prioritization question. What's the worst offender? What's the worst offender in terms of occupant exposure, in terms of just volume of PFAS? Let's try to apply a little bit of strategy so that we don't overwhelm the system before we really have momentum built.
Charlie, so are you saying that 9,000 chemicals is okay as long as we take it product category by product category?
Yeah, I think we need a strategy to sort of introduce more of these to the conversation. That that if we see firms struggling with a class-based approach, a 6 classes-based approach, simply because there isn't enough information to make those decisions. So, we want folks to set goals that they can absolutely meet and then increment from. So the question is where to begin so that we're successful in the early rounds so that there's momentum to proceed to the subsequent rounds. And I want to say I'm super optimistic. PFAS aside, we've made tremendous progress in lots of other chemicals of concern. This one, I think many on the call are have been aware of PFAS longer than most. So it's sort of a question of how do we make progress without overwhelming and overwhelming the system.
We have about a minute left. I'm wondering if our speakers have any closing thoughts that they'd like to share based on what they've heard today.
Okay, good, I'm unmuted. I just wanted to say I'm interested in trying to help create a toolbox to help designers make the task easier. If anybody would be interested in talking to me about what that toolbox should contain and how to what to include for each tool, please send me an email, hannah@greensciencepolicy.org.
Great.
I would just sort of in a slightly different direction say that it's the process management and the project management that I see as key here. How to incorporate this thinking into the work that you're doing with the smallest possible disruption. So if anybody wants to explore those ideas with me, I'd love to talk.
Great. Laura, any closing thoughts?
Just that this was very, very interesting, and I would be very interested in working with anybody on next steps, and particularly as you come up with ideas, any thoughts that you think should be incorporated into the thinking. It looks like there's some people on this call who are from the PFAS task force, but any information that we want to get over to them, I think would be really helpful, because they'll be able to make some broader than project specific change if we can get them ideas.
Fantastic. So as we're wrapping this up, I want to say thank you to everyone. We do have, again, education credits. There's a survey that Ethan's dropping the link in the chat right now. He'll follow up with an email after this, and it's also on the Miro board to a survey on the event, but then also to get your AIA credits. And then to self-report on the LFA credits. I just want to mention that we have our Health and Wellness Roundtable meets regularly, as well as our Living Future Collaborative Roundtable meets regularly and talks about these issues. We'd love to have you join us, and if you're interested in getting more involved and taking action in different ways. We also have that some of you are participating in opportunities for education, where we can pay people to give education, to be the educators, and we can also have that education be free for the attendees. And we're working with Charlie and some others on bringing more classes to make them available to anyone with employees in Massachusetts. We have an open house coming up on the 28th of July in the morning to learn more about this opportunity. We'd love to leverage the state dollars to be able to educate more people on this important issue. So with that, thank you, everyone. Thank you to all of our panelists, to our presenters. Thank you to IES again for our sponsorship, and look forward to collaborating with all of you guys in the future.